Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
And I'm your host, David. Tonight we're talking about Season 6, Episode 13, Far Beyond the Stars. Before we continue, you can find us on Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube as The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast.
That is correct. And as I say every single week, you should find us and follow us because we are a pretty good time. And I think that you're going to really enjoy what we give you when we review this show that is 30 years old that you can watch on Paramount Plus at any time. And I highly recommend that you do so because the show is awesome, criminally underrated, in my humble opinion. And as David makes his first time journey through the show, hopefully he finds it just as impressive. And if he doesn't, well, he won't be back when we do the rewatch. Let's just say that. So tonight, as David said, we are talking about the episode Far Beyond the Stars. We are about at our midway point now into season six.
Yep.
So y'all have been, we're almost there, almost done. But we'll see what happens when we get all the way through season seven, right?
Mm.
But before we dive into this really, really wonderfully done pinnacle episode, we of course like to do our check-in. So, David, how has your week been?
Oh, it's been, I guess, a little rough. Work has been dead. It's dead right now. It's straight up like nothing, literally nothing happened all week. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but not by much. Still working on Shogun. Still a good book. Still enjoying it. They have five books in there. It's broken down into like five sections called books, and book five, the final book, is the part I'll be finishing up this week. Just looking forward to that. And this upcoming, so next weekend, a friend of mine from Kentucky is coming down. Haven't seen him in several years. So we won't be doing the show next week, or at least if you're keeping up with the week to week episodes. We were not going to record next week, so I can spend time with that friend. And yeah, how about you? What's new with you?
Well, first, just to remind people that with David being unavailable, there will be still several episodes that you can listen to because we had some kind of algorithmic glitch. So the episodes are coming out at an odd rate. Of course, if you are watching us live or just want to go and watch us at all, you can always go to the YouTube channel and see these episodes, these versions, of course. Otherwise, you can just wait, and several episodes will be coming out on whatever streaming platform you listen to podcasts on. Okay, so just keep that in mind as we make our way through these things, and don't be discouraged. We'll still be here in some form to give you content. Okay. As for me and my week, I've actually had a pretty good week. I have really stepped it up and changed some things when it comes to the workouts and the workout program that I'm doing, and I'm already seeing some results. I'm already feeling a lot better, which as you may or may not recall, there are the many times that I have, brought up the workout stuff that I do, um, pain management, flexibility, and just, overall being able to grow consistently and in a healthy way have always been a concern of mine. I've had to stop at different points for various injuries or strain or whatever it is. And I'm just glad that I finally seem to have found something that is working for me. And a major part of that, of course, as anybody will tell you, is consistency. You have to pretty much, show up. And I'm doing, 3 to 4 times a week, more towards the four than anything else. I've kind of split it up, 2 days, then a break, 2 more days, then a break, that kind of thing. And that seems to be working out really well. And yeah,
Great.
progress is occurring. It's happening, and I feel better. I'm not waking up stiff anymore. I'm not waking up, really, really like kind of sore and locked in place. Work has been going very well. Things with home and the kiddo have been going pretty well for the most part. So really, we're good for now, and hopefully things stay that way. Because it seems like sometimes if you talk about it and say things are fine, things are great, things are wonderful too many times, something happens. So we're not going to talk about that anymore. Anyway, we're going to move on because I don't want to jinx myself, knock on
Yeah.
wood, and all that nonsense. We are here to talk about Far Beyond the Stars, this wonderful episode. It's a bottle episode. Even though it relates to things that are going on in the greater universe of Trek and in particular Deep Space Nine, it is still considered a bottle episode because of the fact that we aren't traveling to other, locations. We're not using a bunch of CGI. We're not using a bunch of starships and things like that in it. So it's a very contained set episode. Now, for this one, would you like me to give the recap or do you
I
want?
think you want to, don't you? Come on.
Yes, of course I do. I do. With
Please
Ben,
go ahead.
being my favorite here. Yes. So this episode starts off with Cisco being kind of at his limit. We're seeing him at his limit. A friend of his has, for all we know, been killed. His ship has been destroyed. They haven't been able to find any of the survivors. And it's the person that Ben knew very well. And he's obviously heavily affected by their death. His father, Joseph Cisco, is visiting the station, but Ben is just kind of like, waxing to his dad about the fact that, he just doesn't feel like he can take much more. Too many losses, too much defeat, all this other kind of stuff, and he's just kind of at his limit. His father tells him, doesn't help him to make any kind of decision. He just kind of tells him, whatever you decide to do, I'm going to support you. And that's a nice moment, but that's all it is. During that moment, Ben sees somebody walk across not the promenade, but walk across in front of his doorway. An elderly man wearing a period suit. Probably from like the 40s or 50s. Ben wants to know who it is. He walks out of the office. No one there, and no one in ops saw anyone. So he kind of just plays it off as perhaps he was tired and kind of moves on through the rest of his day. We see him a little bit later. He's with Cassidy. They're walking down the corridor. And this is the first time, by the way, that we've seen Cassidy in a while. She's back.
Mhm,
Clearly, their relationship is still continuing and it's on a pretty good note. But there they are. And then all of a sudden, here comes another man walking towards him in period clothes. He's wearing like a baseball uniform. And he asks Benny if he saw the game. And Ben doesn't know who he's talking about, decides
mhm.
to follow this guy, steps through a random door, and ends up on the street in what was that? New York, I guess,
Yep, I would think so.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, and it's like, again, 40s, 50s New York. And he's surrounded by taxis and all the appropriately aged cars and so forth. Ends up getting hit by a taxi and goes down. He wakes up, he's in the infirmary, and they're like, what's going on with you? Jake is there, Cassidy's there, his father's there. No one seems to know what's going on. Bashir tells him, yeah, it looks like you're having some of the same synaptic potentials that we saw in you a year ago when you were having those visions, which were the visions, if you remember from the episode, those are the visions he was having that told him to tell the Bajorans not to join Starfleet at the time.
Right. Mhm.
And so they're thinking, is he going to have another surgery, or is this going to, get any worse or whatever? Bashir's not sure. He says he wants to keep him, under, observation for a little bit just to see. Ben does continue on with his day, and then it happens again, and he's having this full. And now, instead of it being a little flash of something, it's now full on. He is on the street. The little pad that Bashir handed him has now turned into a magazine from that time period, and he's speaking with the magazine salesperson about the future and sci-fi stories and men from Mars and so forth. And now he's fully engaged into this world.
Right.
A man walks up to him who looks like O'Brien. Apparently, these two know each other and they work together at a local, office of some kind, and they decide to walk together to the office. We find out later on that in this universe, this world, his name is Benny Russell. He is a writer for a periodical that's published on a monthly basis where they write, I think it's called Fantastic Tales or Fantastical Tales. And basically, they are all like the early versions of sci fi writers of the era, right?
Yep. Yep.
So, so you have all of our key players are there: Bashir, Odo, Quark, Jadzia, Kira, even Martok is there. But of
Yeah.
course, they're all sans makeup, so we get to see them for the first time without
Hmm.
all the get up. Now, some people obviously are. Well, I feel like they're all obvious. It's of who they are.
Yes.
You know. Um,
Especially the voice. If you know
yeah.
Martok's voice, he stands out. But
Oh
if
yeah.
you don't, you're
As
like,
soon as
who
you
is
walked
that?
in, yeah. As soon as you walked in, you knew that was Martok. And the same is true of Quark, Odo, so forth and so on. No one was a surprise. Well, their voices weren't a surprise, but maybe if you weren't ready for it, seeing them this way would have been a shocker to you.
Right.
Okay. Um, so we find out that Ben or Benny Russell is a writer here. He works with all these individuals, coming up with these various tales that are published every month. But of course, certain things, because of the era in which they live, keep them in, a little bit of secrecy here. The main person who I guess is considered their editor in chief is a guy named Pabst. This is played by Rene Auberjonois, Odo. And he announces that they're going to do a staff photo, but on the day of the staff photo, both Kira's character and Benny can sleep in late because it wouldn't be appropriate for people to find out that this particular periodical has a female on staff who actually writes stories, nor that they would have a black person on their staff either who is writing stories. So basically, going to exclude them. Everyone else is in. Now,
Right.
it's important to note here that Kira's character, her name is Casey. I forget what the full name of the character was, but the only reason why I bring it up is because it was a direct
Eaton.
ref.
K.
What was it?
Eaton. K.
Okay.
Eaton. Yep.
Okay. So Casey Eaton was a reference to DC Fontana, and this is important because in the original Star Trek, with all the shows, the teleplays, and everything else, there was a writer for Star Trek then whose name was DC Fontana, which again always used the initials because they didn't want people to know that DC was actually a woman. It didn't come out until several years later that DC Fontana, who wrote some fact magnificent scripts and stories for Star Trek, and really, she even wrote, several books and really furthered along a lot of the development for characters, famous characters that we know and love, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, so forth and so on. Was a woman and did all
Right.
this stuff for years. So
Right.
there's that. At this meeting, in addition to announcing the picture, Martok's character comes in, and apparently he does these artist renderings. He makes up some really wild pictures, gives them to the writers, and based off the pictures, they come up with stories that are going to go into the periodical. He passes around several different pictures to different people, and then there's one picture in particular of what could only be a space station. He gives to, well, Cisco takes it. Benny Russell
Right.
takes it.
He sees it and he's like, I
Um,
want that one. Yeah.
yeah,
And it's Deep Space
he
Nine.
yeah, it's a very stylized, very kind of classic 40-ish version of Deep
Yes.
Space Nine.
Yes.
But he takes it. And you know what? If you're interested at all, that image is like everywhere. You can go to so many different Star Trek websites, and they have full-on versions of every single drawing that's shown, but in particular that one. And it's also important to note that in the overall Star Trek canon, there is a point where the Deep Space Nine that we know and love is destroyed and later rebuilt by Starfleet, and it does look more like that version of the drawing
Mm.
than the original Cardassian inspired one. Um, some people love it, some people hate it. I'm in the latter category, but go and look it up if you're interested at all. And there's a whole series of books behind what happens and why and how it got destroyed and rebuilt and so forth and so on.
Right.
But again, that's the point. So again, we see Benny. He's taking the picture. He stays late at work. He's leaving. He locks up, and he's leaving. And the wind's blowing. The drawing gets blown down the street. He chases after it, and just before it gets away from him, someone steps on it. He still goes to retrieve the drawing. The person stops him, and lo and behold, we have these two gentlemen standing here who turn out to be police officers. And once again, once they start talking, it's kind of hard to not know who they are. One is none other than Gul Dukat, and the other is none other than Brunt, FCA. I mean, Wayoon. Um,
It's a good
yeah,
point. He could be either
yeah,
one.
he could
That's true.
be yeah, anybody.
Yeah,
One of
yeah.
those. He could be one of
I
those.
only think I only thought Wei Yun because there's Gold Dukat and Wei Yun together, but yeah,
Hmm.
you're 100
Yeah.
percent right. Yeah, it's both.
Damn you, Jeffrey Combs, you got me.
Yeah.
So now they're starting to hassle Ben a bit. They're wanting to know why he's there and all that kind of stuff. It's that quintessential. We're seeing the first outside of work display of hostility with race here. You got these two cops who are inherently antagonistic for no reason. The drawing, blew across the ground. There was no reason for any of that, but they basically don't want to give him the drawing at first. They harass him about why he's there. They assume that he's a janitor. He couldn't possibly be anything of any importance coming from the office. They hassle him about the suit he's wearing because he's a colored man in a very nice suit, and there's no reason that a colored man should have a nice suit. And then finally, he gets the drawing back. There's even talk of one point of just because they can, dragging him down to the station, holding him up for several hours while they checked for priors and so forth. But our other cop, played by Wayoon out of makeup, is basically like, nah, we've got something else we got to be doing. We don't have time for all that. So basically, because they were supposed to be busy elsewhere, they're going to give him a pass this time. And so they give him the drawing, and he leaves. He takes the drawing home. He's playing some music. He's, looking over the drawing and everything else. And then he finally decides to sit down and start writing. And of course, one of the first things that he starts to write is about Captain Cisco. So now we're seeing that Benny Russell is going to be writing the story we kind of knew he was going to be writing all along, which is the story of Deep Space Nine. He begins to write. Um, the next scene after that, we see him in the diner, and this is the diner where we see some of our other people. We see Cassidy Yates works behind the counter. Um, there's a very loud, very famous baseball player who comes in, and again, voice is a dead giveaway, and it's none other than Michael Dorn who plays Worf. But in this instance, he is just a hotshot Negro baseball player who has just scored some impressive feat in the game, and he's the big hero and so forth. And apparently, he has quite the crush on Cassidy, and has no shame in hitting on her, despite the fact that she is clearly also in this reality into Benny
Well,
Russell.
they're together. She wants him to marry her so they can
Yeah,
get the diner.
yeah.
And Michael Dorn's character is straight up hitting on her
Like I don't care.
24/7.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Screw this writer, dude. You should be with me.
right. And
Another
he's not
character
a
that we
jerk
see.
about it. I want to be clear.
Yeah, I will give him that. He's not like in Benny's face or trying to like
Right.
put him down per se. It's more like you should want me because of who I am, but you know,
Yeah,
he only really does it when Ben's kind of not there to a certain degree.
he's kind of
It's
a friendly jerk. He's a little bit
yeah,
jerkish, but he's not like intentionally like digging down deep into that part of his character. But sorry,
yeah.
I'm
You're
commenting
right.
now. Keep going.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine. We're gonna get to all that too because I have we break down these characters. I'm trying to hurry this up.
Yeah, yeah.
Another, I
Sorry,
just
sorry.
want to make sure we know who everybody is in the universe. So then, yet another character that we see here is Jake. Jake Sisko comes in. Obviously, he's not Jake Sisko in this. He's this young, hotshot black guy who's kind of got this. He's wanting to do everything really fast and loose. He doesn't want to have a traditional job. He's always got some kind of scheme. Even when he comes in, he's trying to sell Benny a watch that we don't know where the watch came from. Did he steal it? Did he, whatever? But that's his whole thing. And he's talking about, I don't want a job. I like to set my own hours. I got to do this whole thing. He's got that very patterned speech down of being kind of this, smooth operator type deal.
Right.
Um, Ben tells him about how he's got this great story that is, it's about us. It's about black people being in positions of power and authority in the future and in space. And, Jake kind of laughs him off about it. That's never going to be a thing. And he's like, yeah, it is. Check out the peer article that I write for it. This story is going to be in there. He takes the story. The next scene that we see again, he takes the story to the office. Everyone's reading it. Everyone seems to be very engaged in the story. They've given their little bits of comments and feedbacks here and there, but again, overall, they love the story. Um, but again, Paps, the character played by Odo, is like, yeah, it's a great story and all, but we'll never be able to print it. We won't be able to do it. Your main character, your hero in the story, is a Negro. We're never going to post this in this periodical.
Mhm.
Um, he then tells Ben, "Hey, I'll make a deal with you. Here's a whole new drawing. Work me up a novella for this, and next month we'll run with this. You might even get a shot at the cover, and being for your story."
Okay.
But Ben's like, no, I wrote this and I want to work with this. But after they kind of batted around a little bit, he's just like, fine. And he takes the assignment, goes home, but he can't shake the Deep Space Nine storyline. So the next day, or seemingly the next day, when he comes back to work, he didn't write a new novella based off of a new picture. He wrote six more Deep Space Nine stories because that's what you do. When your boss gives you an assignment, you say, "Yeah, no, here's this."
Mhm.
Um, so now again, everybody seems to have read these as well because they're talking about that it's a wonderful work. They should take them and go and get them published elsewhere. Of course, people offer in their criticism of that because they're like, you could take it wherever, but no one's going to read it because of however those other periodicals work. And so then they come up with an idea to at least get one published, and it's O'Brien's character who suggests that they make it a dream. At first, they kind of, battered around, but agreed that's the best way to do it. So they do. They are going to move forward with printing this as a dream sequence in the next periodical. A very excited Ben goes home, goes to the diner, tells Cassidy, who he interrupts being hit on by Worf again. But he, overlooks all that, and he's just basically like, "They're going to print my story. I'm going to get paid for this. We're going to have this is it. This is my launching point. I'm so excited. We're going to go out, get dressed, get fancied up. We're going out to celebrate." So they do. They go out that night to celebrate. They're having a great time. Oh, another character I forgot to introduce, our prophet, who has seemingly been following Ben around and also kind of informing him on what he needs to do and making him, compelling him to write these stories in the first place, is this kind of street corner preacher who is played by his father, Joseph Sisko. Obviously, he's not his father in this, but there he is. And he um, finds Ben in this moment. And Ben relays the message to him: "Hey, I did it. I wrote the story. I'm now getting it published. Everyone's going to read it." And the priest is basically like, "That's great, but your work isn't over. The trial continues, so forth and so on." Then they hear gunshots. Ben goes to investigate, and they find that our young schemer Jake has been shot. And while we don't see who shot him, who we see standing over him is Ducat and Wayoon as their cop forms, of course. So it's
Mhm.
kind of intimated that they shot him.
Right.
They do say when Ben runs up on them, they do say that they had seen him trying to break into a car with a crowbar, and so again, it kind of leads into the thought that they're the ones who shot him.
Right.
Ben gets very upset. He tries to break through them, break away from them. He knocks one down. He attacks the other one. This does not go well for him, and the two proceed to beat the ever loving crap out of him,
Right.
while interchanging between being human bad cops and Cardassian and Vorta, respectively. We're seeing them
Right.
popping in and out of their makeup.
Right.
Ben is badly beaten, broken, battered. He spends what we are led to believe is nearly a month, maybe a little more than a month, cooped up in his apartment, recuperating from the beating that he received. He's finally well enough to make it into work, which is fortuitous because today would be the day that his story would be in the new periodical. So he makes his way into work, and he's now got, the dark sunglasses to hide the bruises on his eyes, and he's got, his hands bandaged up. He's got to walk with a cane because he's apparently got a limp and some other things that are wrong with him. But he makes it into the office. Everybody is there. They're very remorseful about what happened to him. They try to, just be like, not necessarily saying they're sorry or whatever, but being, aware and respectful of what happened to him while they wait for the editor to come back with the magazine. The editor finally shows up, but he has no magazine. He informs them that the owner of the magazine, the elusive Mr. Stone, has decided that the magazine periodicals that were submitted didn't live up to their high standards. So he had the whole run pulped, which I didn't know what that meant, but basically it means they took the whole thing and shredded it because it's paper
Yeah.
based. So they
Yeah.
shredded it all. So now, um, in addition to it being shredded and no stories being published that month, Mr. Stone has also decided to fire Benny Russell. So now, after all the things he's been through and everything else, he's now lost his job. This kind of is, well, not kind of, but it is the tipping point for Benny Russell. He has a massive breakdown in the office where he is demanding that basically they acknowledge him, that they stop treating him as anything other than the human being that he is, that he has created something new and wonderful, and that it should be read, it should be, published, and you can't deny him just because you don't like the color of his skin.
Yeah.
He ends up collapsing in the office, and which later we see him being led out on a stretcher into a old ambulance, and inside the ambulance is the pastor, who's been waiting for him. And instead of being transported to a hospital, we see that the back screen has changed and it's him flying through the stars like he's in a shuttlecraft. He then wakes up on the station, and we find out that that all happened to him in the space of a few minutes. He's been in the infirmary the whole time.
It really was all a
And
dream.
yeah, and so he now kind of has had this, awakening epiphany moment, and recognizing now what he has to do, which is continue on the course that he's been on the whole time. He has to finish what he started, which is what he says to his father at the end. And basically has the realization that, this there could be something to it. It's more than a vision. It's more than just a dream. There is some kind of connection here between Ben Cisco and Benny Russell, and he has to, stay the course. And that is essentially the episode. Now, obviously, there's a lot more that we're going to talk about here, but that's it. That's the highlights here for this one.
Yeah. Yeah. Quite the episode.
Absolutely. And as this was your first time watching the episode, I just have to ask what you thought of it overall.
Well, we have to start with, of course, the first thing that stands out and arguably the most enjoyable thing: seeing all of our characters, or all of our actors, out of the makeup we would normally find them hidden behind. Armin Shimmerman doesn't have. I'm reading the Wikipedia page here. He used to kind of like having the mask of Cork on to help him stay in character and feel a little protected from the awkwardness of the camera, and it's gone. Odo is probably my favorite one because he's totally different. He doesn't. I mean, you have to like almost squint a little bit at him a bit because the flat face version of Odo with all the makeup on is very different from the. I don't know how old Rene Auberjonois was, but he's late 50s or something. I mean, he looks.
Hmm.
He's not a young spring chicken.
That'd be about
Worf.
right with his age. I think at that time he was around mid to late 50s.
Right. Worf out of his makeup. Michael Dorn, he looks fabulous. I mean, he's so different. He's smiling. He's charming. Worf is so serious and flat almost at times. And to have this chummy, uh, flirtatious
Charismatic.
version,
Yeah,
yeah,
you're absolutely right. He's always smiling in every scene we see him in this episode.
right,
He's smiling. He's this big powerhouse, but kind of jolly
yeah,
character that walks through. So opposite of Worf. Um,
yes,
yeah, it's very noticeable the difference.
yes. And then of course Ducat and Wayun out of their makeup as well. As we mentioned briefly, General Martok, the actor who plays him, is
J.G. Hertzler.
yeah. I mean, his voice is amazing. Like, even he chews really hard on his cigar to give you a sense of like I'm still hiding behind something. So
Hmm.
you get an idea. You very quickly catch on who he is. But he's fabulous. So seeing all these characters, or all the actors out of their makeup playing someone new, was fantastic. Now, what's really interesting about this episode, and I'm glad you recapped it, by the way, because I'll tell you in a minute. But the thing that was really interesting about this episode is these characters that Benny Russell is interacting with are not one for one switcheroos from the Deep Space Nine cast. It's not like the Deep Space Nine characters as we know them have just been interposed into New York late 1950s in an office somewhere. Like these
Mhm.
are, I mean, there's some similarities like Ducat Wayun maybe, but actually most of the characters are very different. Jake Sisko isn't some young. He's not his son. He's not
He's
an
not this
optimistic.
idealistic, yes, yes,
Yeah,
he's not this idealistic kid. He's a
he's
schemer. He's kind of a
yeah,
like a
he's
sewer rat almost, you know?
exactly, and he's got a I don't know. I mean, like the way he talks is very was great. And by the way, I texted it to you when he said the N word, the straight up N word. It's like, oh my gosh, the '90s were a different time. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Basically says
You
there's
know,
no way no one expects N words in space.
I will say for that moment, I have no proof of this, no bearing on this at all. But I remember when I watched this episode originally years ago when it first came out, and when that part happened, shortly after the show's run, they talk about how this show was really one that the powers that be were not paying attention to until later, right? To me, that moment stands out as one that probably someone was like, What did he say?" And then like calls were made and they were like, "How did this get through our sensors and it made the air?
Air,
Who
yeah,
did this?
yeah,
Who?" And it's like, well, it's too late now. It's already out there. And I
right,
feel like it's one of those moments where someone was like, "What are they doing over there on that lot? Someone go over there right
right,
now." And it was
right.
like, "It's too late. We've already we filmed everything. It's done." You know. Yeah,
Right.
I feel like this is one of those moments.
Yes, I can understand that for sure because it definitely startled me. I was surprised it was still like it wasn't censored on Paramount Plus as I watched it. Like someone didn't have a bleeper after the fact,
Well,
on
I
the
mean, it aired then, and it's been 30 years. So,
right,
and TV, the scope of TV has changed so much
right.
that I really feel like probably the powers that be now looking back at it through that particular lens are probably like, well, this is bland in comparison to other things that we have out now. So,
Right.
and it's the only time that it's used in that entire episode. They
It's
only
true.
say it at
Even
full
though
like
the
that
Gold
once.
Ducat and Wayun officers are very racist toward Benny, they don't ever use the word directly, and everyone else uses Negro interchange fairly regularly. Odo's character in
Mhm.
particular, trying to defend. This is just the way it is. It's not that I'm not a
Mhm.
political figure trying to make radical change in the world. I'm just trying to get along in life. I'm not here to piss you off, Benny. I'm not here to mess with you. I just need you to stay with the way things are. In 50 years, things might be different, but they're not like that today. And so this is the way it is. And it's a great, it's what I thought was really great about that is like, I imagine that's exactly what some people said. Like, I, I'm not
It's
trying
exactly
to
what
make
people say now.
riffles. And yeah,
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I thought about that too, and I think that's why that character is one that repeatedly, if you look through various message boards and whatever else, that's a character that always gets highlighted
right,
because his character does. He's not trying to push one way or another. He's trying to
right,
maintain this very kind of perfect status quo. This is
right,
the way things are. It's what is. It's not about how it could be or should be. It's what is.
right,
And there are a lot of people who feel like people even today fall into that category where, they see something that is clearly, or I guess not clearly, but it seems like it would be an injustice or whatever it is. But they just say, well, that's just the way things are. That's just the way that it is. It's better than it used to be, but that's how it is now. We're not going to keep pushing for whatever because this is what we've got. This is what it is. So, yeah, I mean, very complex character for one who um, doesn't want to ruffle any feathers with what's going on
right.
in their world at the time.
Yeah, yeah. His character is arguably because it's Rene Auberjonois, but it's not Odo. That was just great. Like I think that's what I also want to really emphasize is seeing these actors that we've seen like how many episodes are we into now? Like 100 and some episodes.
Hmm.
We've seen these actors play these parts for ages, and now they're playing drastically different characters. As the Wikipedia article points out, Quark is the money grubber, but he gets accused by Odo's character, the editor, of being a communist, which is the exact
Hmm.
opposite of what uh,
Yeah. In
Frankie would
this,
probably be.
so yeah, so in this, instead of him being that quintessential money hungry, going on, Ferengi character that we normally see here, he seems to be more of our
Principled,
very literal kind of progressive voice.
right?
He wants, the representation. He wants the ability to write great stories and elevate things to a certain degree and have the representation and so forth. And he is just not having it. Like his
Right.
character is very angry throughout much of what we watch here. He's the
Yes.
first one to kind of become outraged for, Kira's character having to stay home, for Ben's character having to stay home, for how they're treating the Deep Space Nine stories. He's kind of the first one right there to be like, this, this needs to happen. We need to acknowledge these things. So much so that in order to silence him, um, um, Paps, the editor, calls him or insinuates that he is a communist, because back then this was at the height of the McCarthyism Red Scare, and
Right.
calling anyone a red was a big deal. And even um, um, Armin's character even says, "No one calls me a pinko," and gets away with it. So again, direct
Right.
reference to the McCarthyism
Yes.
issue of the time.
Yeah. But yeah, just going back to like seeing our actors in these different roles. Like I honestly, if Deep Space Nine had more of these flashbacks, maybe it will. I'm all for it because these were great. Worf again as this charismatic, outgoing. I mean, he's a ladies' man. He walks in with 5 young girls on his arms, but he's still hitting on Cassidy. But at what like when he first gets introduced, when he notices that his 5 young ladies are sitting at a booth waiting for him, he very quickly goes, "Oh, I gotta get going," and runs over. And Worf would never let himself be manipulated like that. So it was really great to see these character or our actors playing these different roles. But of course, who takes the cake but Avery Brooks, who at the finale of the climax of the episode, when all of his dreams are being dashed in front of him, and not only dashed, but he's actually losing his job. I mean, Avery Brooks actually cried tears. I watched his eyes.
Oh
Tears
yeah,
came out of his
oh yeah,
face
he cried.
as he had that mental breakdown at the end. Um, and according to Wikipedia, like I mean, it was Avery Brooks was the one who was directing the episode, but they of course had
He
secondary director.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so he was pulling triple duty in this. He played
yeah,
Ben Sisko, he played Benny Russell, and he was directing everyone in
exactly.
this as well.
And and
Lots
according
to
to
do.
yeah, and according to Wikipedia, the unit director for the scene called cut after like Avery Brooks ends up on the floor, and like Avery Brooks like kept going. And what he
Yeah.
keeps crying is uh, what I see is real. What's in my head, what I've made, it's real. It's real, which is very. It's interesting because the point of the episode, on some level, is that he's kind of foreseeing Deep Space Nine, but it's also not. It's that as Cisco says at the end, like maybe both are real. It's
Yeah.
not.
Hmm.
There's truth to both ends of the story, because obviously Deep Space Nine, as we know it, is just fiction. It's just future storytelling. It's what Benny Russell does. We're just experiencing the modern version of it.
Hmm.
But you know, there were people like Benny Russell who did
Hmm.
experience the racism of not being allowed to share their art, their fiction, their anything else you want to think of. Even though W.E.B. Du Bois is mentioned and others are mentioned, um, the number of black authors and writers is both in the fictional story we see here and in real life were suppressed. And who wants a Negro story? Who wants a Negro captain? Who can relate with a Negro captain? And of course, that is literally the question that Deep Space Nine is trying to answer. Who wants to watch a show about Star Trek's been
And
around for a while, but who wants to watch a black actor in this part? So
it's very much the question that, Deep Space Nine was faced with when the show was being pitched, let alone when its development was going in. Several people auditioned for the role of Benjamin Sisko. Avery Brooks was not necessarily the first choice, and that was kind of that was the argument. Like, do we really need to do this? We really need to take this step and have a black captain. We've got, other ways we can do this character and representation and so forth. And then when it was finally cast down that he would be the lead and the show would be centered on his overall, development and so forth, there was a lot of pushback. It was seen as unnecessary. It was a ratings grab. It was all the things that we still hear today about certain shows. This is what was it, the diversity hire in Trek, things like that being said about Avery Brooks cast here as Benjamin Sisko, which, as we've noted through our is for me rewatch and you first time watch of the show, Avery Brooks is a phenomenal actor, and he does a great job in every scene that he's in.
right.
And it's almost criminal the fact that when the show was on, so much of it went unrecognized. And now here we are again, 25, 30 years later, and the show is seeing a resurgence. And he is frequently, touted out as we do of being, he's wonderful. He absolutely delivers in every scene that we see him in. And to speak on what you were talking about earlier, the lack of diversity, something that has long plagued creative development on all kinds of levels. We I think we even talked at one point about in movies and representation in movies, and there being so few black actors and actresses who were in movie roles for a very long time. And we talk about Oscar wins and things like that, and how that didn't happen. And what we're seeing here with writing, I mean, that's something that even to this day is still an issue. And researching this episode, I was looking up some statistics about African American writers in the United States, and one thing I found was it said that as of 2021, only 5% of all published authors are Black, while 83.2% of all editors in the field are white. So there still is this whole issue about proper representation and being able to tell stories that are authentic to the African American experience and actually getting them out into the public and into circulation due to the fact that there are so few African American writers and so few editors willing to publish what stories they do write.
Right.
So, still going on, even though this episode was set in the early 50s.
Right.
So now we've talked a little bit about our characters, as seeing them out of makeup and how they kind of work in this world. I wanted to turn our attention a little bit here to um, Benny Russell himself. So obviously, this character is very different from Ben. We know Ben Sisko as the father, the leader, our Federation captain that we've really come to associate a lot of things with here. What did you think of him, or at least of Avery Brooks as Benny Russell here in this episode? Did did he strike you as odd at all? Was it hard for you to adjust to go from Captain Cisco to Benny Russell, or did you feel like these characters really kind of made a lot of sense together, or anything like that?
The one problem that Avery Brooks has by playing Benny Russell is that he does seem to be older than I think the character would have come off as he had been cast for the first time. What do I mean? Well, again, reading the Wikipedia article on this episode, which is pretty long because this is considered one of the best episodes apparently of Star Trek and of Deep Space Nine.
Hmm.
Um, the character was at least initially meant more for Jake Sisko. So it makes very clear how it's very easy to see how that could have happened. Jake Sisko is a writer already. If he was imagining himself as a young writer, what would that look like? So I think the character of Benny Russell would in many ways make some more sense as a younger character as opposed to Avery Brooks, who was what, late 40s ish, I would say, at
Yeah.
this time.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's the only real problem I have. I mean, the other characters, like O'Brien, played by Cole Meany, he's also in his 40s, so it's not like he was alone as these overly aged person. Armin Shimmerman also in his 40s, I believe, and
Mhm.
so they all fit in that sense. My only point is that um, I would think that people who are looking to write for a living are either young or frankly established. I mean, that's kind of the problem with the episode is like how established are the characters. Benny Russell is writing, but it's not clear how successful he is at the job, especially because we know that the whole argument that Cassie is making is like, you could leave that job and join me here at the diner, and we could make this our living. And you could write on the side for your own personal enjoyment, but it would be your main source of income. And he doesn't want to give that up. So I'm not. The only thing I would say is that and I'm only saying that because I'm now thinking about it. Like it wasn't something I was worried about while watching the episode. They all fit their parts just fine. So yeah, I understand that the episode was originally, at least some parts of it were conceptualized like this part as maybe a Jake Sisko character, but I want to point out that what's going on with this episode, and it was something you said when you were recapping near the end. The whole point, I was trying to remember what the whole point of this whole flashback was. His
Mhm.
father appears as this pastor, this street preacher who keeps saying like, obey the Lord and the will of the prophets. So he's merging, like a street preacher with like the Bajoran faith,
Mhm.
and he says something to the effect of like, what you write needs to be written. The writer's words will save the people, something like that. He says something about the writing that Benny Russell is doing is important, and that seems to be directed at Benjamin Sisko, the dreamer. The dreamer and the dreamer are both real again.
Mhm.
But you pointed out that at the beginning of the episode, Cisco is like, I think I'm at the end of my rope. I don't think I can keep doing this. And at the end of the episode, he's like rejuvenated. You know, there were people who were looking forward to my day. I need to basically honor their wishes and their desires and the fact that I'm fulfilling that on their behalf. So my point is that when I was first thinking about this episode before we came on, I was trying to remember like what's the whole point of everything? Because like it's not like the characters were one for one recreations of their Deep Space Nine counterparts. They
Mhm.
are different people. I mean, Jadzia Dax is a gum chewing little ditzy girl,
Mhm.
not the science officer, and as we know her to be. Um, and so the fact that these characters don't fit one for one means that it almost like these characters are totally original for their own sake. And that's interesting because if it was a vision from the prophets, you would almost expect that they're trying to communicate something more direct to Cisco. So they're going to use all the characters to say something. So, I mean, for example, literally when Cisco was last in there, every time he's gone in there, they've always used visions of the other characters to talk back with him. He has a conversation with the prophets, but they use Odo and Kira and
Mhm.
Jake to talk back with him. And so you'd almost expect them to do something like that in this episode, but that doesn't happen. It really just turns into just a straight up point about racism in America historically and even presently, and then that Ben Cisco is being by this vision given some motivation to continue working on.
Mhm.
There's no deeper allegory like one for one. Odo needs to stand up to Quark somehow, or Jake's gonna die soon. Nothing like that. It is truly self-contained story, which is fascinating. Um, so I'm glad you recapped it because that reminded me what the point of the episode was. And I have to say, while I'm thinking about it, the only character who I thought was not good was Bashir. I do think that Alexander Siddig, he was playing his character a little too much. Like he was chewing the scenery a little too hard. I mean, literally chewing on his cigarette
Mhm.
uh, stick, whatever those things were called. Um, and he was really chewing on his character and his scenes, and lounging about a little too much. I feel like if I was the director, I'd have been like, "Hey, tone it down just a
Well,
little."
I feel like, obviously for the sake of time, they do kind of have to heighten certain things up about their characters, almost to the status of it being a caricature to a degree. And
Fair
I feel
enough.
like what he was supposed to be here in this scene was kind of that representation of someone who is what, I guess, affluent, I guess. He
Right.
came off as a bit more of a rich, snobby type than
True.
everyone else.
Right.
And so all the things around him that everyone else was getting upset or even indignant about or whatever, he didn't really seem to be touched by it as much. And
True.
it's one of the things that he says. There's one line he says a couple of times about whomever it is who's excited and whatever in a moment. He's always telling them to calm down. That's
Right.
what he says. Calm
Mhm.
down. We're not Vikings. At one point, he says when Renee and Armin get into an argument, he just that's his first thing, and then he says it to Benny too when they find out that they're not going to publish the stories that month. He tells Ben to calm down, and Ben pushes him away, and he's just telling him, no, I'm not going to be calm. Not being calm never got me anything. And it's that mindset there, seeing these two characters like so he's in a way, he's trying to show support for Benny Russell, but at the same time, it's it's from this very distant, very aloof
Yeah.
place.
Okay.
And we see a lot of that too. It's like all these things were mirrored. We're supposed to be mirrors of aspects of our own society, and it's these people who, again, can recognize that something is wrong and that that's not fair for whomever it is that's being, uh, prejudiced against or whatever, however you want to phrase that. But then
Right.
instead of doing something about it and actually being a voice for change on it, they're just like, oh, I'm just as mad as you are, but we need to let cooler heads prevail. We need to let other people handle it. You need to stay calm. I'm mad,
Yeah.
you're mad. We can relate that we're both mad, but we need to let that stop here, and then that's it. So
Right.
and then he can just flit off and he can go to his life, and he can go and do whatever it is he's doing and kind of forget about it, because it doesn't affect him anymore. He's expressed his anger. He feels like he's done the right thing by backing the person being subjected to the thing, but now he can go home and it's
Right.
over for him. Whereas the other person is left to really live in that. And that's kind of what we're seeing here. No, it's definitely not even kind of, it's definitely what we're seeing here when Benny pushes him away. He's like, no, I'm not going to be calm. I'm not going to do that anymore
Right.
because I've been doing that. I've been staying calm. And you guys, now is the time that you need to step up and you need to like do something.
Right.
And I'm not going to stop until someone does.
Right.
So yeah, this whole episode was one that it just I'll admit the first time that I watched it, I didn't like it. Again, in my defense, I was very young the first time I watched the episode,
And it
and
wasn't your sci-fi story.
exactly, it wasn't your sci-fi story. I would, like I said, I was very young. I wanted to see the space battles and the ships and the aliens and all that stuff. I didn't have that in this episode, so I didn't like it. And I mean that's also very true of my initial impressions of Deep Space Nine in general. I was coming from the Next Generation, the big enterprise. We're warping to a new system every week. We've got new aliens every week, new problems, so forth. And all of a sudden we're here and we're just stuck on this station and everything's station and whatever.
Right.
But as I've aged and as I've watched the show at different points in my life, and as I have gone through and experienced other things in my life, certain things as you come back around to them, they resonate differently with you than they did the first time, second time, or even the third time that you watch it. And to be honest, I'm looking forward to the next time I watch it. Who knows, maybe 5, 10 years from now, and
Right.
see if this is still something that holds up for me.
Mhm.
um but like I said, I didn't like it then, but over time, I really come to appreciate this episode because for my own life and my own experience, I can remember times where it felt like if I just kept my head down, I did my work, did what I was supposed to do, or what I was told I was supposed to do, that eventually things would work out, that it would somehow come out right. You'll you'll make the right connections, you'll make the right friends, you'll meet the right support people, and people are going to notice you because you do the right thing, and they're going to promote you and help you and elevate you and so forth. Doesn't always happen that way. And seeing this representation and being like, okay, that's something that actually has been consistent in my life. Because again, I've watched the episode several times. Um, I don't. It just it made me feel different on that third and fourth time watching it, and I recognized that I like this more for that than before I realized that. I guess is how I'm
Mhm.
trying to phrase that. So I don't necessarily know where I was going with that, but I maybe do you, because I guess this is kind of a harder conversation to have because I know that oh, excuse me, talking about race and racial issues can often set people off in different ways. And with us obviously being on opposite sides of this issue, um it's and what I mean by that is we've lived a different experience. I think that we've come to the conclusion through our talks and friendship, and obviously this show and so forth, that we agree on a lot of things. But at the same time, are there ever any moments where you feel like in looking back on your overall experience and dealing with people of any race, do you feel like that there's been a time when you've been more like Pabst in a moment, or more times when you've been like Armin? I think his character's name was Sturgis in this episode.
I think so.
More like the Julius character in the episode. Is there anything like that that you feel comfortable
Well,
relaying, talking about?
yeah, I'll say it this way. So I grew up in a school that was, but like my high school was a pretty good amalgamation of everybody. I mean, I don't have the stats in front of me, but I always joked it felt like it was 25% this, 25% that, 25, 25, 25. Like that's probably not true, obviously. I'm sure it was at least, the white kids were probably more than 50%, etc. But I grew up with other black students and Asian students and etc. etc. Um, Now I think the most important thing for me, there was a so up the street from where I lived, where my parents still live, was a family that my mom got to know the mom there, and then our families became friends and everything. And while the eldest child, they had two kids, they had a boy and a girl, and the boy was a year older than I was. They while during elementary school at some point they decided to adopt a brother and sister who were black. Um, Tried to adopt, and they were the brother and the sister were supposed to be the same age as their kids. So uh, the the son and the new black adopted son were they shared a room for as long as I knew them, middle school, high school, etc. And so for me, I had a white friend and a black friend who were brothers, and that was what it was. Now, later in life, when I became an adult, I've learned more about how they definitely had more. I mean, for the boy who was white, he went from being the having one sibling to one other sibling, and that new sibling was sharing his room, and siblings definitely clash. And I mean, you'd have to ask him what he would say about any of that. But for me, it was like they're my friends. They are what they are. Grew up with people. The church in church. One of the most important lines about in Romans is there is no Jew nor Greek. There's no whatever the line is, if it's the full scripture at the moment. But there's no Jew or Greek. Everyone is equal before Christ. And so the biblical understanding of race is supposed to be that we are all made in the image of God, etc. Um, so I'd say that as on a personal level, I've grown up knowing the history of the country and how terrible it is, and growing up knowing people of all races, and growing up in a culture and a church that talks about how we're supposed to be beyond whatever that crap was. Now people today might say that we still have a lot of things to do. Okay, fine, fair enough. My point is that I grew up in an era where it seemed to me, for the most part, that a lot of that was just in the past. You know, how far into the past you go. I mean, the 50s and 60s seem ancient to me, but my parents were born in the 60s. You know, my grandparents were alive, but both of my grandmothers are still alive. I've never heard them say anything racist, so I feel proud to be part of a family that is quite the opposite. You know, I mean, I wouldn't say that I know them to have a very diverse racial group that they are a part of. No, they live in primarily white areas as far as I know, but at the same time they've never at any time expressed anything negative toward anyone else, and in fact the exact opposite is again Christian faith on that level. um so for me, like, which of these characters would I relate to? Maybe the Bashir character on that level. Because I would say that my current concern is that uh, if we keep picking at the scar of our racial history as a country, if you keep picking at it, you cause it to break out again. You cause it to bleed again. So at some level, and I even have a personal story about that. There is a scar on my foot that when I was a kid, like elementary school, I had a big scar on my foot, and I had a problem of I would pick the scab and I would pick it off and pick it off and pick it off, and like I have a scar now from the fact that I didn't let this wound heal properly, and it's you can't really tell it's there unless you look for it now because it's from when I was a kid, and in some ways it healed, but I know it's there and I know what it was from, and so part of me is like, if we are going to talk about racial issues, if we do such in a way that picks at the scab and I'll just say it that way, picks at the scab, then I'm concerned that we won't the scab heal and the
Okay.
scar be there because I think the saddest thing about history is that anyone can go grab some bit of history and throw it at someone else. Like anyone could use the N word right now and act as if they're saying it with the same intonation and belief system of the 50s and 60s. But I don't
Yeah.
think anyone legitimately would be saying it in that way. At
At
least
least not
you'd have,
publicly.
well, yeah, or you'd have to go to some really weird backwater area where people haven't,
Yeah.
haven't joined us in the last however many years. My point just being that we we need to, like, this episode is a great example. The show Deep Space Nine has not made an issue of the fact that Cisco's a black captain. He's just the captain. But we have one episode where it is important. It is something that's talked about. It is directly addressed. And if every episode keeps doing this, at some point it's going to sound like a hollow drum. We've heard it before. But if it can every now and then tell a story about these issues that are thoughtful and relatable, and if the acting from Avery Brooks is still on top of it, then it'll work.
Hmm.
But yeah, I just said a
Okay.
whole lot. I don't know what
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
said were
Well,
opposite
I
of
mean,
experiences. So yeah,
well, yeah. And so to that, I would say two things. I feel like, and this is something that I brought up a lot, not just in the show, but also in conversations that we've had, that I feel like in society today, we have a tendency to want to very quickly and very aggressively overcorrect. We see something as a problem, and in our rush to address it, fix it, we go to the extreme opposite end, which often leads us into a whole other world of problems. And
I
so we're
completely agree
so,
with that. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so I feel like to some degree, we are so just hell bent on being like, that's it, it's done, it's over, we've solved it. We never want to talk about this again, that we miss very critical areas where there still needs to be some kind of, handling, some kind of discussion. Now, to use your scab analogy, I will say that you're right. If you keep picking at something, um, it will never heal properly, and you will always have this lasting, reminder of a terrible, painful moment.
Right.
However, if we do the opposite, or we go through the part of, in order to make anything heal properly, it must also be properly addressed, and it
Oh yeah,
must be properly handled. And if
yeah,
wound is deep enough, you have to debride it and get all that gunk out of
Oh,
it, and
and to
you
keep the
gotta
analogy going, when I got home from getting that scar, my mom
mhm,
put alcohol on it. So yeah,
right,
made
and
it
it
hurt a whole
burns,
lot worse.
and it hurts,
Yeah,
but you got to get through it. And
yeah,
I feel like we get to points where it seems like we're going to do that, and then some people get all uncomfortable, and all of a sudden committees are formed, and then books are burned or removed from schools or not accessed or whatever the situation is that somebody feels like will fix the awkwardness, the pain. They do those things, and then we're still left with the problem. We didn't
yeah,
solve the problem, we just removed the thing that could have potentially, healed it a little bit. So now I don't have any necessary, like necessarily a solution to what it needs to be, like what would be the ultimate fix for this situation. I wish I did, and I wish I had the ability to influence and make that a thing that happened, but I do know that in both those scenarios, any immediate overcorrection where it's now like we're ignoring the issue entirely will never work. It will always figure out a way to come back at us. And if we keep ignoring it, when that does kind of come back full circle, it'll be worse than it was before. And we've seen that with a lot of other things that, when we again try to overcorrect and then ignore, when those things pop up again, it's worse. It's awful, and then again, if we're not taking the time to um, address the issue in a very, open, candid manner, and some things are going to be trial and error as to what works and what doesn't. But I feel like if we're at least making those attempts, we're better off than overall not. And I think that that starts with conversations like this one, with episodes like this one, with being able to see, other people uh, use different mediums to, to shine a perspective or give their perspective on an issue, and not being afraid to talk about it. It shouldn't be that. You feel like that you can't, or that you must agree with every single thing, or that you just inherently must disagree either. I feel like there is something to be said for being able to watch something like this and being able to talk about it and say, hey, that part made a lot of sense, this part didn't, or you know I didn't like this particular scene, but this other part was really, really good. Or in this book, these first 5 chapters were phenomenal, but then everything else about this is complete crap. But we have to be able to do that, or else you're just left with a scab, or you're left with an open wound. You know.
yeah,
So, and I feel like that stuff like this does, and I would like more of that to continue. I feel like right now, the way the society is, we're not really seeing it. What we're seeing is more that rush to say we've solved it without actually solving it. And that's a concern for me. And as my own kid comes up through this and everything else, I don't want her to have that same issue, because I know there was a time in my own life when I didn't think that racism was an issue. And then one day, some things happened, and I was like, oh, that's what this is. I didn't even know what was happening until it kind of, you know, it just like a, lightning flash in my head. It's like, oh,
right,
now I get it, and now I'm upset for a whole other reason, So it's worrisome to me when we don't allow for the conversations and stuff to happen, because I feel like more and more people might end up in situations like what I was in, where you don't realize what's happening to you. And thankfully, I had, my own, family, friends, whatever, to kind of help me out. But there are people who might not, and they might end up so far into a situation where they're being objectified and being, subjugated and so forth, before they realize that's what's happening to them. And it's
yeah,
because we don't talk about stuff anymore. So,
yeah,
well, okay.
yeah. A lot there.
Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, and as to kind of close up what I wanted to say about this episode in general, this is one of those episodes too that, while it handled a very dark subject matter, especially for American television, especially for American television at this point in the '90s, it was off also a very hopeful one because as we see at the end, we're back on our station. We're back with Captain Cisco, and he's talking about the fact that there does seem to be some kind of blurring of the line here of dream and dreamer here, and that's what you alluded to as well. And I like that they use this all through the allegory of early science fiction writers in the 50s who that's exactly what they were doing. They were um, projecting way into the future and looking at the development of people and what it could be because obviously there was no way to know. You're talking about something that's going to be happening 4 5 600 years in the future. You have absolutely no way of knowing what anything's going to be. And for a writer to come up with something that even while handling you know um, a racial issue to still come out of it with a very positive, a very optimistic view of our future, I think is amazing. And I like that we see that in this episode. I feel like that's also what all of Star Trek has always been about, is showing us how in the future we have overcome so many things. They don't have to spell out for us exactly how we overcome everything. They just say that it happens. We work through our issues somehow along the way in the next 4 to 500 years. We start to figure things out and we are better for it. We're better people. And we, you know, the thought of everyone not being represented and taken care of, and the elimination of poverty and hunger and disease is so arcane from their standpoint. I like that. That's kind of where this is saying that we could go if we get over some of these things, or when we get over some of these things. I like that, and I like that this episode really highlights another issue that perhaps, not even perhaps, that we don't talk about as much in Trek anymore. That was definitely a part of the '60s. We didn't really do that much in the '80s with TNG, and now here we are coming back with it in this '90s show. But again, something else. Hey, this is something that we know is a hot button issue. We know this is a bothersome thing, but again, we want to say with Trek that we know this is a temporary problem, and in the future we will not have this issue, and I
Right.
like that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. 100%.
Well, is there anything else that you would like to say as we, come to the end of our hour and probably 15-minute show?
I don't think so. I think you said
Yeah,
it all.
I think we said a lot,
Yeah.
covered a lot, and I mean this episode could be broken down again and again, a couple of different ways, with different looks at different characters. Who knows? We may do a recap of this at some other point, especially as we get more towards the end of our show and maybe talk about some particular highlights or whatever. But for now, I do feel like we've covered pretty much everything here. No new Trek updates, as I've told you before. All projects seem to be, full steam ahead that are out. And if you're curious about any of those, just go to Paramount Plus. They've got a whole listing for all of those things. We will return at our new day and time. We have now moved the show to Sunday nights. I meant to tell you guys that last week, but I will, go ahead and do that now. We've moved the show to Sunday nights at 9 o'clock. That's when we'll be doing our live episodes. And again, once the algorithm catches up to us, you'll still be able to get our episodes via podcast every Saturday. Again, once that all sorts itself out through the magic of math and the internet. Um, but yeah, Sunday nights, 9 o'clock. If you can be here and join us, great. If not, you can always catch the episode whenever you have a chance because it's up on YouTube. So there you go. But I think that's going to do it for us on this episode for this week, guys. So until next time, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, guys.